Setting up here.
Okay. Hello and welcome. And welcome to the Circle Anywhere crew, which I'm not, we taped the camera, so you're not going to see there's a live audience. But for those who haven't been to one of these talks, we have an online studio, and they're like simulcast to an online group. Looks like people from Colorado and Dallas and California, all on. I can't see where else. And we give like 80% or more like 90% priority to you guys, and then every once in a while I'll like check in the comments there. So for you guys on Circle Anywhere, you just comment. I'm not gonna your sound is not coming our direction yet. Well, we can get you to say hi and bye afterwards. It's good to be here. It's good to be back in Austin. It's good to see a couple new faces. And basically we'll spend the next hour doing a kind of, I would say collaborative inquiry, but I am going to it's not totally, I'm mostly telling you things. And I'm aware my view is limited and distorted in all sorts of ways. There's an invitation to kind of come in and ask questions, and might be not now or whatever, but try to keep it a bit of an open dialogue. Any questions before we launch right in? I'm just saying that to buy myself time. Hey. And we'll see it here. It's very blurry and digitized, listening and turning off video. Looks like I'm blurry for them. Aw. Maybe I should wipe it off or double check my video quality.
Can you record?
Yeah, it's recorded. Yeah, I think there's just something wrong with the camera. Well, I'll try to figure that out for next time. I also might be referring to that. Okay, so the title for today's talk is Unleashing, I'm not going to write it, Unleashing the Power of Your Developmental Spectrum in Relationships. And basically, I'm going to draw from, there's this whole field of developmental psychology or developmental sciences I want to draw from. And I want to go into that. But I'm trying also to learn, give one takeaway, as if I were giving a TED Talk. And I think the takeaway for this thing is to embrace your whole human and work to grow. So in the integral, a lot of the stuff it gets summarized really well in integral philosophy, integral theory, and integral terminology that talk about the embraces include, and the working to grow or going beyond is transcending. So transcend and include. Go for the higher level, but don't forget, if you learn to walk, don't give up crawling. Even though crawling is mostly not the most appropriate way to ambulate around the world. Another way to say that is what we're going to do today is learn to keep the baby while throwing away the bathwater. And not learn, it's I'm not that awesome. But the learning is going to come through a lot of application over time, and you guys have already learned most of this stuff in different ways. But it might give you a sense of places that you may have pieces you can pick up that were left behind or repressed, or places you can stretch out more that you maybe haven't realized you could until now. And I think we're going to break out and do little exercises as we go. So for you guys online, you can either just wait or play along with yourselves, and I'll mute the microphone so you can just do it in the main room. Okay, so we're gonna use a model that's based on this Harvard researcher, Robert Keegan. And so I'm going to say a lot more about the context, but I just want to say for a second, no, I'm not going to say that. I'm not going to say anything about that because it doesn't matter. It's not that exciting. Okay, so think about the whole point of this thing is like, if you think about like at some point in your life, like you were like a baby and you had to pee and you couldn't control it and you just peed everywhere, right? Like most of us don't remember that, but like we had this kind of impulse moving through our being and we didn't realize we could choose. And eventually one day, if we were like lucky enough, which all of us I think were, we learned to like not to like basically control that impulse. So instead of the impulse like having us or us being subject to it, we had it. And the interesting thing is like we have more capacity. That's what we're talking about when we talk about development. You get more choice, more capacity, but it doesn't mean anything other than you have more capacity. Like now I can pee actively on you instead of accidentally. So in a way I'm like more dangerous, right? And that's the kind of like, we don't ever get rid of needing to pee. It's like impulsive. We would say the first order is impulsive. Yeah. And there's a whole category of things you can think of as like being a baby and like being subject to all sorts of impulses. One of the things I think that circling does really well is it basically is like there is a healthy place for this, and it's not necessarily just in like, you know, when your car, like when you get in a car accident and you like act on autopilot to like get out of harm's way. There's a way that you can kind of like tune into your impulsive nature and allow like healthy impulses to be expressed. So you can kind of like re-welcome a kind of intuitive knowing that comes at that stage of development that you might have forgotten. So we're going to play with that, and I'm going to use the like. We also have these 5 principles in circling. This is going to seem a little messy, but it's going to all come together at the end. And hopefully, the 5 principles, like I could look at a developmental spectrum and show you in any given one principle, like how, like, yeah, here's the first order version, here's the second, here's the third, here's the fourth, here's the fifth. But for the sake of like tonight and for ease, I'm going to pick one to assign to each level of development, so you can try to like feel it in the moment. Does that make sense? So we have this principle of like staying with the level of sensation in circling. And what this means is like being like really attuned to your own body, like what's happening right now in your own being. And you might even notice like your awareness of it. Like don't bother putting words to it for a moment. Just see if you can tune into like the raw feeling of being in the world and like existing. Like I have a kind of anxiety in my gut. I'm giving words to it now, but there's like something like immediate to it that like boom, just like pulls me into the here and now. And we find that like this acts as a guide for bringing us into like a deep presence. We often forget when we're relating with each other. So when you're talking with somebody, it's easy to get into all these whatever thingies and forget like, oh yeah, like my gut's telling me something. Or like my back is tight and my shoulders are back, and that means something. I don't necessarily know what it means, but it's like a piece of data happening in the moment. So let's take a moment and get into groups of 3. There'll be one, you'll be a group of 4, you guys. Let's just form little groups of 3.
And online.
So, and we're just going to take a couple minutes to really feel into like this pre-verbal, impulsive kind of place that lives in our being, that never goes away. Just like the capacity for crawling never goes away. It's there, it's fundamental. And you're going to start with the sensation. And we're going to not give words. If you need to give words, like you like, get scared and want to set a boundary or something, that's fine. But like, see if you can just stay in a kind of non-linguistic closeness to your own sensation, the movement of your body from the inside. And then, if you haven't already, allow your awareness to expand to the other people in the group. You're still staying with your sensation, this kind of basic here-ness. And now see if there's some sort of movement like, that your body, that sensation wants to do. If that doesn't make any sense, then try looking for some sort of resistance or tightness or pain in your body, and just make a guess of what would be more pleasurable than what you're in now. Start to let yourself move, just impulsively, intuitively. And notice even if you're stuck to the chair or the floor, that's actually what your impulses are guiding you to. Maybe you can move a little more. So we're kind of setting this original intelligence free. Okay. Feel free to let yourself continue to trust your impulses to a certain extent, but I'm going to ask for your attention back here again. But now that I've made it common knowledge that it's not super weird to be randomly moving, you're welcome to do so for the next, however long I feel like that blanket permission lasts. So can you get a sense of that impulsive nature, this kind of basic being here and kind of moving, yeah. So what tends to happen in development, if it's healthy, is that that stays, but then we develop a bigger self that can hold these different impulses. There's other impulses or whatever, and there's a kind of basic egocentric self that in this particular theory, the guy calls it imperial self. I'm going to call it egocentric because that's easier. I think it captures the essence. Basically the same way, although there's different issues with changing people's labels when they've spent a lot of time thinking about it. Throwing this out for now, I'm just going with what I think will convey the idea best for this crowd. I think this is a really interesting level of development because I think in the traditional American society, we basically are like, this is not okay. We call this like the terrible twos. Like someone's terrible because they like just start shouting and just trying to get what they want. And they're like all about themselves. But then I think what happens is like anything that you like call bad and like put away, it like finds some sneaky way to get itself out. And then I think what happens is you get into these like personal development meditation circles, and like suddenly you get like tons of people who think they're like coming from a really high stage of development, but they're actually just being super fucking egocentric and like narcissistic. Like, well, I just need to get my needs met. And like, I think that's great. I think you should get your needs met, but I think you should call it what it is and like call it like it's egocentric, and like that's fine. That's like a natural part of being human. And in fact, I think we could go like further into it. And this is like the part where you're literally just like, what matters is like it's like just me, I matter. And so I don't mind being like, I don't know, like aggressive or like resorting to violence, like just gonna hit the other kid to get their toy. Or I don't know, maybe there's like a more like relational version of that where I like manipulate the other kid to feel guilty if they don't give me the toy, but it's still violence. It's just relational instead of like directive. It's like I remember I was in my friend's house, and her like 3-year-old came out, just ran out of the bathtub like naked, and just like this, like he was like, look at my butthole, and like right, it's like look at me, I'm awesome, I have a body, like kind of I think one of the things that happens in circling is we actually like allow ourselves to like touch these energies or this part of ourselves we've repressed for a really long time. And we're trying to learn to do it in a healthy way where it's not like just look at my butthole, like just carte blanche. Like it's finding a way to like skillfully allow, where you like keep the baby and throw out the bathwater, or like include the beauty of this level while also like transcending. And I think one of the ways we do that is through the principle of owning our experience. So this is like taking a kind of radical responsibility. And in a certain sense, like in this world, the world really is all about me. So we're doing this from a higher level. Like I'm taking radical responsibility for my experience of what's happening. In a certain weird sense, it's like another octave of the world's about me. So to get a feel for this, we're gonna go back into, now we'll do fours. I think, yeah, groups of 4. There might be one group of 3. So let's do it, and then I'll give you some instruction.
Join us. Yeah, you can do it.
So what you're going to do is you're going to ideally feel right into this moment and only this moment. And from a developmental stance, like feeling it, like remember that at that age, like you probably literally didn't have a conception of time. Like you could not be in that moment.
So trying to feel in this moment, the lens of the past.
You're allowing that intelligence or that energy to manifest. So even like the argument is like that's still in you. Like that's still there in a certain way, and you can tap into it and feel like where you really don't have a conception of time. There's only now. Yeah, and I mean, mothers and fathers will like recognize this probably even from the outside, even more than like remember it from the inside. And then, so the prompt is now to speak with basically making it all about you. So I want, right now I need, right now I am, right now I notice.
Can you still note?
Feel free to let yourself play as much as feels right on the edge of safety, and of course, like you're in relationship with other people. So like, don't do like hitting somebody to get the toy thing. Yeah. Okay, and I'll mute so that certain people can play amongst themselves if they want to.
But, you know, I want NAM, the homework assignment from Jordan.
Yeah. I want to do popcorn.
But I also want the whole thing.
It's not.
Yeah, probably don't want to show on my day. More than I actually am.
I really want to know.
Well,
Who's on
that's-
the
that's-
for this thing, like, I want to know like, who's gonna be here. Or we should do it, I that's what we did.
Yeah, but you just said, and why did you close?
I want you to acknowledge that we didn't want to close.
I'm not instructing you about it, but I noticed that how I think they did
People are places.
strong emotional reactions across like a wide continuum of feelings. I know like some areas of people walk in, like those kind of fucking stresses, like I just want to
Along with that, like walls, like the game of Battleship. I still want to be playing with the also have walls. What good music.
Can you be more selfish?
Rocking back and forth.
I almost feel like it.
Oh, that's selfish.
Yeah.
Sounds like, you don't know.
Okay, what do you notice? Is it hard for anyone? Yeah, who's it hard for? Who's it, like on a scale from like, this is super fucking easy, this is like my favorite place to be, to like, I hate being like this kind of egocentric, where are we at in the spectrum?
Hate down here.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, nice. So this is what I think one of the things, like understanding the world through this lens can offer. Like I actually think this is a good description of the world, but I don't think you actually have to agree with like this like ontological claim. Yeah, we're unmuted, right? Yeah. I don't think you have to agree with the ontological claim that like this actually is how humans develop, or that it's like a universal thing or whatever, to like find value in it. So I think this is one of the pieces of value. It's like, I think what happens is when we aren't capable of like allowing this to be fully expressed, basically it just comes out in other ways. And the more you can be clear and allow yourself to express, like, yeah, I actually want this, or I need this, or this is what matters to me, unapologetically, like without needing to justify yourself, the less you use like sneaky little manipulations and like other things to try to get what you need. You basically make it more conscious. This is part of the freedom of circling. It's like, and the scary part is that like when you really allow this energy, you have to face the vulnerability that you're likely to not get what you're asking for, right? Especially in the kind of civilized societies that we live in. Like, you're just like, oh, I want this and I need this. Like you have to allow the energy and then like be the parent holding your kid, being like, I understand, but you have to eat your broccoli first. And like that's, I think, pretty hard and like vulnerable. And that's one of the things that we're practicing with each other. Let the energy up, let it out. But the other mistake is like to only let it out. And that's actually not that honest. Right? If I just said like, okay, cool, we're in a shame-free zone where we can all just do whatever we want. Like, it's just not actually true. you can't, I haven't been to a place where that's actually been true. Like, and when I think about it, it sounds like being in like Mad Max or something. It doesn't actually sound good. So if you felt a kind of discomfort, it's likely that there was like you were tripping into this next level, which Keegan calls often like the socialized mind. I think this is a good, I'm switching again because we go from like egocentric to ethnocentric, but nevertheless, I think it's a good way to describe it. And again, like, you're like, I want this, I'm egocentric this way, this thing, and I have this other like, little demon that wants these things. It's like holding all these other, there's a sense of these kind of Russian dolls where you like one thing continues to include all the previous things. That makes sense? We have a no. Yeah, do we have a no?
No.
Can you clarification? Is each green circle a different want?
I'm not exactly sure. So when I think about my own self, like I want like fizzy water right now, and like then I also want, I don't know, to like give a meaningful presentation, and I also want to like tear down my garage and like build something that doesn't get moldy. There's like all these like weird things that are like totally unrelated. But and I think when I'm like only operating out of this intelligence, I actually do literally bounce back and forth from like one little green circle to the next one. And like I basically just forget the previous one. And then I might go back to it, but like the self I inhabit like is basically like defined by that thing. Like it's almost like this energy, this egocentric energy drives me. And like that's all I am. And I think we've probably all felt at some point today, not in the exercise, you probably like cut someone off in traffic because you were like, fuck you, I don't care, I need to be on time for circling or something. You probably, like, I would venture to guess that we're all like operating from this level, even if we're like the most enlightened people, like multiple times per day, probably per hour. Like this thing is coming forward, and that's actually fine. What's not fine is like when it like hijacks a much more complex self and then like causes damage to others in the world or something. Basically when it's unconscious. It gets more and more fine the more conscious it is, and the more you're like kind of allowing and making these choices. But so what happens is like I have this kind of, so it's one way I could say this is like this socialized self is like rule oriented. I've gotten this sense of like, well, I'm in the middle of the talk. I can't just get in my car and like drive home and get fizzy water. I can't just like take Kay's fizzy water. I know she's got a second one in her bag. But it's not cold, so I don't want it anyway.
No, you hold that.
But in any case, like there's a kind of larger set of principles that I'm living under, that I'm like subjugating my egocentric wants and needs to. So they get held in like a larger embrace. Does that make sense? And this is another one I think I think we actually repress even more in modern society. In a really weird way, because we're supposed to be autonomous, self-defining individuals that like make our own opinions, that like, think things through and do things rationally and have strategic plans and all that stuff. But I think like this is like the foundation, or like this is kind of like fabric of society. Like we moved from like warlord emperor bands into like nation states when we were able to like have socialized selves that were like subjugating our just random power needs to like a higher rule of law. And so I think this is like super important. And this is like, you'll notice it like right now, if you start talking with somebody, and you'll notice like when you smile when they like give you affirmation, and like I think that like right there is the socialized mind. You're like, oh, like right now, some part of me, like my like little early animal self, feels like safe because I think you like me, or like is seeking approval in some way. Like you approve of my ideas, like somehow like I'm okay and you're okay because we're like part of some togetherness right now. Does that make sense? And again, I'd say like many times today, if not much of the day, you probably, like all of us were like thinking or operating from this kind of intelligence, this energy inside of ourselves, the socialized mind. Again, like driving here, when you're not just cutting somebody off in traffic, you're probably like following the set of rules, not because you like thought it through and you chose for yourself that like, you know, living in this kind of society, you're not thinking of the system, you're just like a person who drives stops at stop signs. And I'm gonna stop at a stop sign because if I don't, I'm gonna get a ticket. And that sucks. Not because like, yeah, well, and some of you might actually think about this when you're driving, like, yeah, I need to stop at the stop sign because if everyone doesn't stop, then like the world's a bad place and you're like applying the Kantian categorical imperative to your driving. But like, I would say you're in the like 0.001% if you're doing this. Most people are just like, I'm gonna follow the rules because if I don't, like, it's kind of bad. And it's, I don't know, you're just kind of doing the ethnocentric thing. That's fine. It's healthy, it's good, it helps society run. This is like the trains running on time. I think this is something I've been bringing more attention to, like even just like starting this talk at 6:15, like because we said it's starting at 6:15, and so like I've done the other end pretty well. Like we end at 9:30 because we said we're going to end at 9:30, and then you can trust that and you can like make your plans around it. And if we didn't have that, it's much harder for you to trust like coming to this, and then like you're like, oh well, fuck, I'm gonna have to like defect and like feel the tension of like breaking the socialized thing, but they've already been breaking it, so I'm like a little resentful and judgmental and all that kind of stuff. Do you have a feel for this? I think one way we do this in circling is the principle of being with the other in their world. And this is like, for those who, this is maybe your first time circling, being with the other is like, we kind of like, at the extreme version, it's like we suspend for a moment, like any assumption about what reality is like, and we just see through the other's point of view. And we're like, that's so interesting. Let me see what it's like there. And just kind of like try it on as if it were my point of view. I think this is actually one of the things that makes humans unique amongst animals. It doesn't seem like, there probably are some mammals, dolphins or chimps or elephants or something that can do the empathy thing. I don't know, I'm not like an animal biologist person, zoology, insert all the ologies that involve animals. But it seems pretty unique that we can actually like take on another point of view. We like basically move to a second person perspective here. And another thing that's really interesting is that I think what happens here is like we get shame for the first time. And I actually think shame is like, can be a very healthy emotion because it helps us like put all of these egocentric things into a larger framework that allows like people to coexist in a really powerful way. So in a way, like shame invites us in a really weird way, like is actually an invitation into like a wider interconnectivity. And this is another thing you'll see in circling all the time, like people are like, oh, I'm starting to feel shame. And like the thing that we do uniquely in circling is we're like, there's nothing wrong with that. Like it's fine if you just want to feel shame. We're not gonna try to make you not feel shame. And it's even more fine or like more powerful if you can stay in the shame and then connect in it. Like, so if I'm feeling ashamed of myself, can I like then in the society that I'm afraid or projecting the whatever shame onto, like can I then look and see what's there? Is Gail actually judging me? Maybe she is, maybe she isn't, but I'm like taking a courageous step to face the truth. And like maybe she is, and then can I stay in that? Like to stay in the feeling of shame, but also be associated with the outer world, I think is a really powerful thing. And this is one of the places, again, I think that circling does an amazing job of training us, not through the like form of circling, like you're going to use some special language or like bring all your friends to this studio, although you should definitely do that. But more that like you'll just be out at a bar and you'll be like, oh, like you'll start to notice that you feel shame. And like normally what happens when I don't notice is I like quickly try to do something to like earn my place in the relationship again, right? Yeah, you recognize that. But instead it's like, okay, well, let me suspend that for a moment. I can always do that quick earning the place thing in a few minutes if I want to, a few seconds. And let me see if I can feel the shame and then connect in it. And relationships will get like really powerful really fast if you just do that one thing. But of course, we can do it with a whole host of other emotions.
When you say connect it, can you say verbalize it? Or
That's a really good question. I would say that comes with discernment. Like
just it's shifting your perspective.
at a simple level, it's like I think like first it'd be like being aware that there's a world out here. Because like when I go into shame, I basically shut down. So like I'm doing this. I'm like usually looking down. You could probably start to feel it actually if you put your body in the posture of shame. Right now, you probably start to feel the echo of the emotion. If you like look down, kind of hunch your shoulders forward. Notice it, and then you'll notice that you cut off subtly. And what you can start to do is like expand your awareness and notice there's all these other people. And then the next step would be like you could like look up, pick a person that feels safe or whatever, but like look up. Actually, the next step would just be to look up more generally. And then a further vulnerable step would be to like pick a person and like look into their eyes. And like see if you can stay in that while looking. And like that's the first connect, or the, like really we're connected. And then it may be that we have the kind of relationship where there's enough space, or for whatever reason, I do want to verbalize it and say like, oh, I'm noticing that I feel ashamed. But I wouldn't necessarily go straight there. It's more of a relational tuning, which is part of what we're practicing here. Like, how do I bring that skillfully? Yeah. Do you guys want to do a quick practice to get a feel for this level? That's not a hell yes.
Oh, yes.
Sure. Okay, let's get it. Okay, so then let's do the same form groups again. It's okay, 4s and 3s. And here you're going to say, you're going to try to speak honestly, but instead of talking about I need, I want, whatever I am, see if you can talk about we. We are. And you can be very like literal. We are sitting in 4 chairs. Or you can try to take a risk and be like, we are respectful of each other. We are enjoying this contemplation. Does it make sense? Go for it. We all find out.
Range of experiences.
That's why we are enjoying
We are probably now. Lie down.
We are interested in it.
We're trying to figure out what to say. We are finding it hard to see for everyone. We are what? We are enjoying this.
We are uncomfortable. Sometimes you feel like a map.
Curious. Beginning exercise.
We are comfortable with that.
Here's what the exercise is about.
We are changing us.
We are holding that.
second guessing.
You'll read it on fine.
It's a good point. Yeah, I wonder what's the next. There's really physical reactions.
Are okay with the possible of this level? Very careful.
We are comfortable with silence.
We are,
We breathing.
I'm not sure what to expect tonight.
We are looking for something.
We are doing
A lot of words right now.
we are assuming each other genders.
We will wait for that. We are wondering if we would like.
I'm wondering about how we get to
We love this group.
We certainly have a lot to say. Is anyone uncomfortable with this?
We are.
That's better.
We're uncomfortable.
Nice. I'm going to try to introduce a little bit more tension. Switch to speaking about like how much you love America. And like speak about how awesome we are as Americans. If you're not, is anyone not American? You're like
Why are
US.
you looking at me?
I kind of look like that.
We are American.
Just because you're born in Kenya
Yeah.
doesn't mean you're not American, okay? So yeah, just try speaking for a minute or two about like how awesome it is, how awesome fucking America is, like as an American.
We don't want to hear that.
Yeah, we have so many choices here in this country. Cereal.
Tons of land. Lots of veggies.
We are we have a lot of stuff. We'll be okay.
We made a lot of good things.
We're good at science. I think we can play the ball here.
Noise ordinances.
Keep it on first.
But like when you.
Don't like
We're willing to admit we're wrong more often than a lot of people.
I mean, we don't need the apparatus to be with each other, to be there for each other. You know, the government, we are really good at valuing, you know.
We have good values.
We can use it to our
We don't
advantage.
just stick to them. Values themselves, they're good.
Don't like our
We have a pretty wide range of
They're real good values.
very smart space.
We don't like our legislators.
Our Senate,
Some
for some reason, it's easier to say, this
Our
is what
Senate
our
is
children will have
Democratic.
enough than say, it's just, we're rich.
patriotic.
Or representatives.
We don't like that. We don't like first words to another
Camaraderie.
Some
Some of us are very
Maybe, yeah. We love guns.
We find guns very exciting.
So, I'm gonna have your attention again. And was that uncomfortable for anyone?
Yeah.
What made it uncomfortable?
There's There's like
That's the
there's like
The president, okay.
there are like rules about things that we're supposed to be ashamed of for sure. There's definitely like a list of things you're supposed to be ashamed of. And if you're saying things you're not ashamed of, you should also be like, but also of course.
Right. So that's funny because that's actually in the kind of socialized thing. There's a bunch of reasons why we should be ashamed if I break them, like breaking the code. What else made it hard?
It's interesting because you said, talk about why we love America.
Yes.
I could see we kind of veered off into why we don't love America.
It's bullshit. Yes.
So says
Why did you veer off? Do you know? Was it like what Duncan was saying, or is there?
Conscious.
Yeah.
Just we're expressing our criticisms.
Right. Others on why?
I actually found this easier than the first activity.
Nice. There are some people where like they for whatever reason they're like maybe the stage in their life or the way they were brought up or the particular culture. Like if I talk to I've got these amazing friends and circling leaders that live in Mexico. And if I was like talk about why Mexico's amazing, they would feel zero shame like bragging about Mexico. It's a different cultural context. There is something interesting about that, I think. In any case, I would argue that one of the reasons this is hard, in addition to all sorts of complicated shit, is because it goes against this kind of like next level of development, which we're going to call self-authoring.
it's really hard to say definitive things about other people.
Yeah.
Yeah, I found it very,
We
because I was very aware in that moment that there's no way I can speak for everyone.
Right,
We don't want to do this.
right. Although if you remember like being a kid and you're like, yeah, like we wear Jinkos, or like, yeah, we watch whatever, we watch X-Files, or like you had no problem like speaking for the group. Right, or if you like had a really strong like Christian identity or something, you'd be like, yeah, like we believe that that God sent His only Son Jesus Christ to save us or something.
Can I just say something real quick? Okay, so like for me coming from a place where tribe is also really strong identity, your tribe, speaking for my tribe feels very okay and normal and natural and good.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah,
cool.
I was thinking about, traveling to other countries that are more of a collective mentality.
Yeah,
That, we are having our experience in this culture that has formed that, but it's not like that necessarily everywhere.
yeah, it is. This is a really interesting point, and I think it is meaningful because like America especially has this like self-determination like streak that's like very autonomy oriented, and I think other cultures have this like communion streak that's very like relationally oriented, you could say. One interesting thing is like people at first criticize this particular developmental theorist. There's a bunch of other developmental theorists. This stuff, like this is more like a spectrum that I could have divided in a bunch of different ways. So I could divide this into 2 stages. I could divide this into 2 stages. I could have just been like ego, ethno, world. I don't know, like, but and there's a variety of different theorists. Some of them are men, some of them are women. It's like pretty across the board from different places around the world. But what's interesting is that at first somebody was criticizing this guy, Robert Keegan, for this model because he's like, well, it's basically like too Anglo-centric. It's very like, linear and blah, blah, blah. And it turns out he checked with a bunch of his students that were from China and India and like these more collectivist cultures and these more like with these more Eastern religious backgrounds that are not about like developing to be the Ubermensch, but it's more like, deleting the self in a certain sense. And they were like, actually, this theory feels very validating. This feels like it actually captures the essence of our culture. And you can see like in this way that I've drawn it, it's actually more about increasing embrace than growing to be like a better person per se. It's like you're actually including more of what it means to be human. And I'd also argue that like these, so I've been talking about like moving this way. It's like it's like we can learn to like reclaim and honor these different energies. But moving this way, I would say almost like these were all already here. So like when I look at a baby, I'm not like, oh, it can't like, I'm not like it's defined. In some ways, I'm like it's defined by its impulses. But I also see that the baby has an ego and lives in a society and has like some sort of self-determination. So it's like even though the baby can't see it, I know it's there. It's like waiting to be discovered from the inside. Almost like atoms were here all along, but like it took us a while to like find molecules, which took us a while to find from cells, which took us a while to find from like looking at bodies. So like the atoms were always there, and we just kept developing our capacity to like disclose more of the reality that's already present. And then we're like, oh yeah, from atoms, there's like, we can break them down further, we can keep going.
There's something that's kind of interesting about this is that I've been looking a lot lately at the top down and bottom up simultaneously kind of co-defining each other in a weird way that's like, doesn't seem like that's possible, but then it's like, no, that's obviously true. But what you just said, I experienced, and I've heard it's not a completely unusual experience. When my daughter was born, my first child was born, and I looked at her for the first time, I just was suddenly stunned by she's a person. Like I didn't expect to see a person, and something like she instantiated in that moment, like somehow me seeing her and her holding me was like it's not fully developed, but it was fully there. Like it was stunning, and somehow it's just like, what? I'm meeting her for the first time, and there's something just very deep about it.
Wow. Yeah, so that's fucking great. This is why I love having it interactive as well. Like I can't imagine those things. I don't have a daughter, at least not yet, or that I know of.
Yeah. Thank you for being honest.
Yeah. I wonder if I have to be careful with those kinds of jokes. Like, who am I gonna? Yeah, thanks. So moving from like socialization to like self-authorizing, I think is the task of the modern adult in a lot of ways. And like, or at least in our kind of like Western societies, this is what we ask people to do. And in some ways it's pretty hard. Like I said, like we're often following these kinds of rules. What this means is like, let me like define for myself. Let me see if I can do enough studies or research or epistemological kind of like self-contemplation to like find what's true, like out of my own definition of what's true. I'm going to pick my own ideologies. I'm going to choose in the moment what matters. I'm going to set boundaries. Like setting boundaries is pretty hard. And then it's like I continuously find places that like I thought I knew what it meant to set boundaries, and then I'm like, oh shit, like I'm in all these like weird codependencies, which is basically like the unhealthy version of the socialized self. And then I'm like, okay, I need to like basically be more autonomous. Even though I think it's gonna like that my girlfriend's gonna be disappointed, I have to take time to myself, and like I'm gonna choose that, like not because I'm just gonna do what I want, but because like I've like thought through the consequences and I've like considered the options, and I just know that like actually the relationship's gonna be better. That's the include part if I transcend it and like get some alone time. But I think circling is really good at this training as well, because, and this is part of the reason why like there's a dance between like, man, like there is like a socialized cultural norm of how to be in this room, whether we like it or not. Like it's here, no matter how much we bring attention to it. Like there's always going to be like, I think, little bits that are under the table, and it requires like new people coming in and being like, why the hell are you guys doing that? For us to be like, oh yeah, that's a good point. Like I wish we didn't do that, and let's like update it, let's change it. And I get to see this because I get to travel around. We get Circle Anywhere. It has its own weird little cultural rules that are different from the Austin Circling Studio, which are different from when I circle in Colombia, which is different from when I'm in Amsterdam circling with people there. There's like little social structures that emerge that you can't avoid. Like it's fine. There's like a healthy version of it, especially when it's honest and out front. And and explicit as much as possible. But we do this weird thing with circle where like we don't really want to give you a hard and fast set of rules. Partly because like we need you to like look at these and choose for yourself. And if I give you like, you'll see this in a lot of like spiritual communities where like there's actually not a lot of self-authoring. Like people are following the prescriptions of the guru, or even if it's not a guru, they're like following the sacred text, and they're just like, even if it's like supposedly a very postmodern, like whatever spiritual community that's like very trans-friendly and blah blah blah. It's like those are rules that you just absolutely cannot break, or you don't belong in the community. And some of that's fine, again, when it's clear and open and honest, but like we're actually inviting people into a deeper like self-determination. So one of the ways we do this, like we call our practice often surrendered leadership circle. And this really brings in the leadership aspect. So I'd love to take a few minutes. I know we're running near the end of what was planned, but take a few minutes in your circle to basically practice the self-authoring in the circle. To do this, we do a little experiment where you basically try to lead the circle into the conversation that you want. Yeah? Go for it.
Is that what you want? Is that
No, but then I realized about 3 sentences in, and I went with it. Like the English, yeah.
Like, we might consider that maybe we want you to do. So we're.
It's basically just like this meandering ways from this person's and it just slowly trains it out. No, it has it. Just like cards that like I read all of the ones you sent, and it's just like, oh, slow down. So I'm
Come on there.
I'm sure I should feel.
I even, yeah, maybe a little bit. Like every sentence is
Like your resistance to
Right.
connection,
I'm sure I will.
because I felt like you guys like didn't want to play, you know, I feel like you're making like some sense where I was like to the point where like my thoughts like went all the way down the road, like I'm not gonna die. It's like so strange to like do it. But hearing both of all of y'all talk, like really softened that.
it's by the time.
Yeah.
Exactly what he said.
If you like, not oh yeah.
I know, right?
Let's do about one more minute.
Particular. More like for me, like
Why are you trying to?
Yeah, it's too.
No, but it's all on that. I've never seen it. I get to say that.
Yes. That's all purpose.
Kind of like dispatch that I know how to desire.
I mean, I don't think the facial got on purpose.
Yeah, well, I have a beef
Later, we come on.
eating mostly straight leg.
I was gonna say that a lot.
All about. Like,
Okay, come to silence. And people are arriving because we're officially at the end. We're gonna start the next thing in 15 minutes, but I'm gonna take a little extra time to hopefully very quickly go to the next stage and then recap backwards. And those who have just arrived, feel free to like do your own thing or listen, and you might or might not have any idea what's going on. Did anyone feel that one being uncomfortable in different ways? Yeah, what would you find?
Do something that feels like I didn't want to do anything. To lead it where I want, it was like, it almost seemed like I wouldn't get what I want, so I bother or something, and then it's like, well, what do I even want? And
Right.
so I just felt like,
That's one of the huge powers of, I think, of like self-authoring is like this capacity to kind of look ahead and be like, am I going to get what I want? And if the answer is no, it's like, fuck it, I'm not going to invest valuable resources, time, money, energy, emotional bandwidth, whatever, like into that thing. It's just like not going to happen. And like that's a limitation as well, because like there's an assumption that like I can know like the future and what's going to happen, and like I've got all the variables input in a meaningful enough way to like guess. And one of the things we see happening over and over circling is like we basically force people into this tension. We're like, yeah, man, like you get to lead, like have fun, like try to make the group what you want it to be. P.S. Everyone else is doing the same thing. And like when you face that kind of chaos and complexity, like weird stuff's going to happen. It's usually unpredictable. Like you can't think ahead necessarily because it's going to be really difficult to know what like all of these 20 people are going to do when they're given the freedom to like go for what they want, which it turns out the same way like this was already here in the baby, like was already here in society anyway. So there's this like idea there's like at least one more like big thing, which this guy Keating calls self-transforming. And what that means is that self is in constant transformation, in like constant change. So you take like this particular self-authorized version, you take another one inside of you or a bunch of other people, whatever, and you like you inhabit a wider space that can actually like hold all of these different ways of assuming the world exists, these different frames, different ideologies, and like let them, like the self that you are is like this movement. It's almost like you're the song being played as life rather than a note or a particular stanza or refrain or something like that. And you might, what's a way that we can feel this right now? I think just for a moment, like pick someone in the room you can make eye contact with and make eye contact with them. Hopefully this will work out with numbers. Does anyone not have a someone? And for a second, like consider that this eye contact is a string. And what's important is not that you're one end of the string, although that's necessary for the tension, but actually the note that gets played between you guys. So you might notice that like the other end of the string, whether you like it or not, whether you're saying anything or not, is in some way like causing you to quote unquote vibrate. And in that sense, it's changing your end of the line segment of the string. And so in this sense, you're somewhat defined by this other person. And you might notice that this could be scary. It might threaten your autonomy. It might feel like falling back into socialization. Maybe you're right. See if you can feel the more transcendent version, which fully includes that you can elongate the string and make a deeper note by backing up. That you have total freedom to move as your end of the line segment and impact them as well as they do you. And now, if you imagine like right now, your note is being played. And then notice that there's like a dozen other notes being played. And their resonance is going to subtly influence yours. So this whole room is like playing a complex chord of relational dynamics right now. They're not necessarily equal influence. Like your partner has a way bigger influence on you than someone across the room, potentially. But there is some kind of collective or interconnected resonance that's partially co-constructing you. This is one of the invitations of circling, to go beyond the autonomy in a way that includes it, and to get more agile and elegant navigating this realm. And you may notice, if you'd like to drop eye contact, feel free. That exercise is officially done. But see if you can hold that.
I'm 30 minutes, I apologize.
Because you may notice that as that wider self, when you really feel into it, there's like an incredible freedom to self-author. And like in any given relationship, you have a total right or freedom to go to define what you need to define, to argue different opinions, to do your own thing. And you'll notice, like, as that space, you have a total freedom to be socialized. To, like, you don't feel like you're in a big threat to your self-authoring self when you like need validation, or when you want to be a part of something, or when you say America's fucking great, because it is. And you know that like that doesn't mean that Canada's not also great in different ways, and that America's great in ways that Canada isn't. And you feel total freedom to show up in like really weird egocentric ways, and like crawl on the floor like a lion, or I'll not make any other references to stuff we talked about earlier because it won't make any sense to the people that came in afterwards.
We don't care.
And then finally, you have a total freedom to be in this kind of pre-verbal, impulsive, like totally intuitive place. It's like make sense of the world without language, like pre-linguistic sense making. And I think that's why I like this map and what it can offer, and how it relates to circling, and how it can make your relationships better. And we'll take one or two questions, and then I'll be officially done. And we'll take 5 minutes to rest.
Is that your creation, or is that an official map that circling uses?
This is an official map that, a semi-official map. I think I have to like, I think I might have, I don't know, we put Imperial. It's a semi-official map that Robert Keegan uses, this Harvard researcher, and a bunch of people. He's got a whole subject-object test. They have these interviews. They can try to gauge roughly where someone's like center of gravity of their stage is at. And there's like different people that criticize the method and say, oh, well, it's much more variable. Like people are in a particular level at a particular context or in a particular skill and not in others. And there's other maps. There is like we have a blog post where I've like gone into greater detail, split this into like 9 stages instead of 5, and then been like looking through those lenses. This is what circling is. This is what circling can do or not do. So yeah, but circling is in some ways like frame agnostic. So it's like basically, that's a frame. Like it's saying like, try some shit out, see for yourself, and hopefully this will be useful.
Can we get bicycles somewhere? Is it online there?
That's also online.
Just go to the Austin website.
Yeah, go to circlingeurope.com. That's where the blog.
Because I tried this before, but I couldn't.
So in lieu of further questions, I took a little extra time. People are coming in. Thank you guys. And that is officially done. We'll start up again in 5 to 10 minutes for the next round.
If you need to sign in, you can see over here. I'll get signed in. Hey, how are you? Good. Hey, Luke. Thank you.